Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to evaluate tradable pollution permits. So I'm going to look at why tradable pollution permits might be effective for correcting market failure and reducing the negative externalities from pollution, but also why the schemes may not work, what the negatives are. This would be particularly useful if you are doing a 15-mark question and you're having to evaluate how pollution permits work, or if you're doing an essay and you're talking about these. Also, an example that you might want to include in a longer answer is the European Union's emissions trading system. This is a tradable pollution permit system that exists in the European Union at the moment, and it's designed to reduce the amount of pollution within the EU. So starting with the positives, the most obvious one is that there should be less pollution, because a limited amount of pollution is allowed. Firms aren't allowed to pollute over the amount that's stated in their permit, and if they do, they'll be fined. The other positive is that this scheme uses the market mechanism as a way of correcting the market failure. So we have a market for permits, and this creates a profit motive for firms. So this allows firms to decide what they want to do, given the fact that they now have these permits that they need in order to pollute. But they can change their behaviour and decide whether they just want to have the permit and be allowed to pollute, or if they want to invest in more green technology. The other benefit coming from this is that they can make profits from the sale of permits or parts of permits that aren't being used. So if a firm is allowed to pollute 100 units, but they only pollute 80, they can sell the excess of 20 to another firm. And they can use these profits for investment. So this can be good for firms because they can invest further in their business and improve the efficiency, and also that could improve how consumers receive the service and the quality that they're getting, and potentially the prices may come down. So we can see as well, if the firms are selling some of their permits, then they're going to be investing in green technology so that they can pollute less. So it looks as if it's going to change potentially the culture of firms. They won't want to pollute as much, and they'll want to have more green technology so that they can sell the permits and they can make more profits. Because remember, they may invest the profits, but also some of the profits may go to shareholders. So the pollution permit schemes offer an incentive for firms to completely change their behaviour and for output to become greener, and for there to be less pollution. Also, the final thing is that the government will receive the fine revenue. So if any firms go over the amount that they're allowed to pollute, they'll have to pay a fine. And the government can use this, perhaps, to pay for cleaning the environment. So they may earmark this for spending on the environment and for cleaning up the environment. Remember, to earmark means that you say it's particularly going to be used for a purpose. You can also use the word hypothecate. And they may use this revenue to clean up the environment, so it's another positive. However, there are definite negatives to this system of government intervention. First of all, how does government know the socially optimum level of output? How do they know what the socially optimum level of pollution is? It's very difficult to measure negative externalities, and therefore it's difficult for the government to know how many permits they should allocate. It will be difficult for them to get to the socially optimum level of output. So that's the first problem. And if they allocate too many permits, this will mean that actually the level of pollution is still too high. If they allocate too few permits, this may really harm the businesses and they won't be able to operate properly. And this might cause them, for example, to fail and shut down. Also, how do they allocate permits at the outset? Is it unfair? Do firms that are already large get larger quantities of permits or that allow them to pollute more? Is it unfair on smaller firms or new entrants to the market? How do they decide which firms should receive the right to pollute different amounts? This can cause another problem. A third issue that we have with the pollution permits is that firms may actually leave the pollution permit scheme area. They move outside the area. If that happens, this is going to create unemployment because they may just move to another area in the world where they're allowed to pollute as much as they like. They don't have to have pollution permits. They don't get fined. And if firms actually leave the area, then we'll have an increase in unemployment because the job opportunities will no longer be there. And it just moves the pollution. So actually, if the objective of the scheme is to reduce pollution, it won't be reduced at all. It will just move the pollution outside the area. And finally, there are going to be a lot of administrative costs for governments to put this in place. They need to firstly allocate the permits and they need to calculate what the socially optimum level of output is and how much pollution should occur. And then they need to monitor to see whether the firms are going over the amount that they're allowed to pollute. And that monitoring is going to be expensive. And as usual, if the government's spending money on something, there'll be an opportunity cost.